All right, we're live.
Okay, first question. As you look at the facts that you are learning about Regency fashion, what sorts of influences can you draw about the society? So did we understand where like Regency, like that term came from?
No, not really. Not fully, I don't think.
What I understand is, remember how the like first reading we talked about was how the Prince Regent had to reign because the king was like crazy but not dead. So I think it's that time period. It's the Regency, and it's post. Oh, this is post Marie Antoinette period where there's like the big wigs and the huge dresses. But that's in France. Marie Antoinette is France. So Regency period is pretty much going alongside the Empire period, which is what Napoleon Bonaparte. So it was the Regency was the Prince Regent was reigning, but they were at war with Napoleon. So it's like that same time period. Early
Didn't it say?
1800s.
Oh, okay, cool. That it was like pretty much the Romantic period is the same as the Regency period.
Sorry, it like cut out. What did you say?
Is the Romantic period and the Regency period like the same thing?
I think it said that.
Yeah.
Cool. So what was it? Wait, so the question is,
what facts from Regency fashion are you learning?
what sorts of
okay, as you look at the facts from Regency and fashion, what sorts of inferences can you draw about society?
So they started moving away from like the super extravagant hair and powder and like flowers in your hair and extravagant dresses, right? And they went more like simple, the high waistline and like simple materials. That's correct, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Sweet.
Another source I looked at also was like they went from like there was like a rise in like the middle class, and it was like kind of, I think that's what I would say. It's showing that like we want to be a lot more practical. Especially like dresses used to have trains and that would like get all muddy and gross, and so it was a move towards also neoclassicism, however you say that, because with all of this war and like the two powers trying to outdo each other, I think or maybe it was just Napoleon, they started doing a lot more conquests and like looking into the art of Greece and Egypt and stuff. So like that classic region or classic era was like brought back. So that's why you see like the huge wigs are now turned into like loosely done curls that are piled up like in a loose bun. That is also in Greek statues. And like the empire waist and stuff like that. So the sorts of inferences we can draw about society was that they were, one, like you said, becoming more like practical without all the frilliness and extra layers and insane hairstyles.
It kind of sounds like they're getting smarter. Like,
yeah,
realizing that like that's not all the hype, and it probably took them so many hours to do all of that stuff, and it was just like they could be, like you're saying, more practical, and like they're just figuring things out, it seems to me.
Yeah, I feel like it was like the start of like moving towards like simpler days, kind of, just because it's like before they were wearing like these huge ball gowns everywhere they went, and in this period, like you saw, the guys had like the long like skirts and stuff, and like that slowly like started to go away, and then like you could tell that was the start of just like progressing to where now we're wearing like jeans and a t-shirt for girls and guys, and so yeah,
and I think it was a movement towards like, oh, well, like it was a younger generation pull too. Like the older generation or people who are like professionals, like lawyers or doctors, kind of still kept their wigs and stuff. But the younger generation that was coming up was cutting their hair to look more like the Greek statues and wearing more realistic boots and pantaloons. Pants. I think we could go to the next question. What sort of meaning can we attach to the changes in women's sense of what shape their bodies should have, or the fact that their hairstyles were simplified?
That I feel like I was kind of confused about, because they were talking about like corsets and stuff, but they were saying that it wasn't the corsets that made them slim. Did I read that right, or is that wrong?
Wait, sorry, say it again, it cut out.
Sorry. The corsets that they wore, what did I read right, that it was like it wasn't to make them slim?
I think they moved away from corsets from the Victorian era, right? Because Victorian era, think like reference to Pirates of the Caribbean, that was all during the time of big, huge dresses and the wigs. And that was when the corsets and the lower waist, where the natural waist lies, was. And then they moved away from that, I think.
So then they didn't have them at all in this period?
I think they did.
At the higher waist lines.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I was just reading the thing. So it said women wore corsets, but they were not the incredibly small-waisted corsets of the mid-Victorian period.
I feel like they almost like what is that word? Made the bust more noticeable than the waist more noticeable. They were like push-up bras. So, okay. So how can we attach those changes to the women's sense of what we have? Maybe they were realizing that, like, or they were looking at the classical era, because the classical era was more drapey fabrics, and some of it was like right under the bust, so it's more of a sense of like the Greek and Roman mythology and art focused more on the woman's bust as showing that she's a woman rather than how tiny her waist is. It's like focusing more on what makes a woman, I think.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, because like the pictures, like the ones in the Victorian era, like they had the waist was so small, but in the other dresses that they were showing, the pictures were just like they kind of just like went down here and they just draped down. So it's like even if they had small waists, you wouldn't be able to tell in those dresses either way. So I don't think they needed that. So that's why they focused on like the upper area. So
yes. Okay, so how about we talked a little bit about how their hairstyles were simplified. So what was the meaning that we can attach to the changes in the woman's sense of, so what? That doesn't make sense when you split up that question. Okay, so what does it mean? Why do you think they changed their hairstyles? What meaning can we attach to those changes?
I think it goes back to like being practical. Like they obviously spent so much time on their hair and making it perfect. And then by this time they started to just throw it up, and not throw it up, but it was just not as time consuming. And so I think that goes back to being practical and like having better things to do than do your hair all day.
I think also with that, there was a greater push towards natural beauty, powdered hair and powdered faces. I mean, they still wore makeup in the evenings or to dances, but even with like those dances, they only did their hair a little bit higher and bigger. But you know, that's what we do too. Beauty, and again, following that I can't say the word, Grecian style.
So like back before this, that like super extravagant puffy hair stuff was like an everyday thing, like that was their casual dress. Is that right? Like that's how they walked around.
I know that like Marie Antoinette was like, I mean, she was like the queen of the princess or something, but famous for her hair, her wigs. Like her wigs were like pieces of art, and they had like cool, crazy things. I think like obviously not with the working class, but it was like you tried to do it when you could to show that you had more money and you had time to do things like that. I think it's like wealth, just like the different colors of dress too, like the lighter your dresses, the more easily they could get. So it was like also showed that you were more wealthy. Makes sense, they were lighter.
Yeah, I think that also I think I read that like during the daytime their dress was a little more casual than evening wear. Like party or not, I think that they like most of the pictures I'm assuming was evening wear because those all look kind of nicer. But the ones earlier in the day I think weren't as nice. If that kind of answers your question a little bit.
Yeah. I guess I was just like wondering if like part of the change and like why they did stuff is because they were just like realizing that they had to, maybe they were doing stuff throughout the day, like maybe their lifestyles were changing a little bit, and so instead of just all fancy all day, because it said yeah they still like dressed up for like the balls or whatever, like the evening time. I don't know.
I think, yeah, I think it goes with like a general fashion note, which is like balance in fashion. And it even made reference to this where like the bottoms of the Victorian dresses were huge and frilly and insane. So they balanced it out with huge wigs. But then when we moved towards the less is more and the more natural, beautiful looks, like it just all kind of like. Okay, we'll go on to the next question. What does this have to do with the way women were thought of or thought about themselves?
I almost feel like they used a lot of tools to like beautify themselves, like, but at this point, I think they started to, like you said, like bring more natural beauty into it because like they had the wigs and they had the huge dresses and the corsets that like made you look skinnier than you actually were, and then in this time period, like they were starting to use their own hair, and then less makeup, especially during the day, and then their dresses were not as extravagant and they didn't show off their body quite as much. So it almost seems as if like this is where like less started to become more, maybe. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they, I mean, so talking about like what they thought of themselves or like what people thought about women in general, like women are more capable than just like sitting there and never going outside and having the fairest skin, like they actually do other stuff. Or like because that was kind of the vibe they were putting across in the previous photos, that like, oh, my skin's so fair because I don't do anything except sit here and get painted. And then like this more casual like, or like more simple thing maybe like changed. I don't know, people were changing the way they thought about women, and women themselves were changing the way they thought about themselves, and just being more like word um,
No, that's right. Like this was also like the Jane Austen era, like where Jane Austen started writing books, and I think women started to have a little bit more ideas and speaking out. Not so much, but also,
just the very,
huh?
I just said like maybe just like the very beginnings of that, like what you're saying.
Yeah, because this is early 1800s going on in the US in the early 1800s. I mean, this is like the same era as like Joseph Smith. So, this is also, I think, like, okay, so it says, what does this have to do with the way women were thought of or what they thought about themselves? If this was moving towards classical Roman, Greek art, like those statues are like throughout time, since whenever they were created, have been remarked as like the icons of beauty, like, and it's like beautiful and natural and like fabric, just like not a ton of effort, but so much. I think that that's what they were moving towards too, is they were like, well, we can have that too. And much war too, it was cheaper and much more easily accessible for everyone to kind of enjoy this fashion. So everyone can be beautiful. I don't know if, like, I think I'm just making inferences. I don't know if anything I'm saying is right.
Sounds good to me.
Next question. Okay. What is the significance of the empire waist or the empire waist? I mean, I Googled it. It said that it just came from like Napoleon Bonaparte's wife was the empress, and she was the one that kind of was the icon of beauty. And England, even during war, like kind of still emulated or copied France's, because for some reason they've always been icons of fashion. And she was, especially because her husband was the one going to all these places and bringing in all these new styles and these influences from the places that he took over. She was incorporating these into her fashion. And so the empire waist, I'm pretty sure it's pronounced differently than it looks, but empire waist came from her, from what I understand.
No, that's cool. So like it is significant because it just shows that they're still copying like other nations and like copying styles, and they haven't quite like gathered their own thing yet.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I think it also shows like that diversity kind of started to be a thing where they brought like other cultures together. And so when he was taking it over wherever he was, like it showed that, I'm sure it wasn't only the dressing styles that he brought, but I'm sure he brought like other types of food, other types of like, I don't know, whatever
architecture.
else. The what?
Architecture, for sure.
Yes. Yeah. So it doesn't just show that it's dressing, but it's like everything else that I'm sure was mixed into that time period as well.
Yeah, even like if you look at couches and things, like you go from like these frilly couches with like all these like flowery patterns into these more like just like more Egyptian looking for other things, or paintings too, like artwork took a huge turn during this time period. I thought brought up was the significance of the empire waist, because it's like a fashion thing. It's still a fashion thing. Like when you, it's like, oh, do you want a drop waist or an empire waist or these things? But empire waist is from not the Regency period. Technically, it's originating from the Empire reign, which is going on at the same time. But it just shows that there's an overlap. Like Tanner said, they're still copying each other, getting fashion advice from one another. Okay, why did men become simpler in their dress?
I don't actually know the answer to this question. I was like kind of wondering, did they just start to work more? Because it said that middle class was rising. So I'm like, did they just kind of get more practical with their dress because they started to work and earn money more? I don't know. That's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, practicality. And I think there was also, it was like French, post-French, mid-French Revolution? I think it was the French Revolution. Oh no, 1700s, right? French Revolution. Yeah, French Revolution was from 1789 to 1799. So this was after they've killed. In one of the readings he posted, it was like they wanted to show that they were moving themselves away from frilliness and like things that were unnecessary into a more like manly, bold looking manly look.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say too. And I was it was like funny watching that YouTube video because like they show a picture of the like that one part. They like show a picture of the woman and they show a picture of the man like right after, and they're dressed like super identical, like all frilly and super feminine, and like I think they probably just saw that. Like somebody had to just realize like we're men and we need to dress like men. And so like yeah, I don't know. But like seriously, like you were saying, like they were men in the middle class and they were working and the middle class was rising and those were the type of men that were working. And so since they were rising, that fashion of like get things done outfit came. So that's it.
And it came with too how I mentioned earlier with wigs, how like the more professionals, like the older generation, was still kind of keeping to those fashion styles because they're like, no, this is professional. Like this is like the standard. But then the younger generation was like, that's impractical. Like we gotta change this, like all this stuff. So it was kind of like the younger generation that came in and swept it out. And I don't know, I can't remember which side I read it on, but it was like these boots became really popular because when Napoleon invaded this one area, didn't like fall apart or whatever. So everyone had to have these boots because they were so amazing and practical. So just, I guess, things like that. It's like they wanted more like things that worked versus things that looked really awesome. Okay, next question. Why did some men become obsessed with having well-cut clothes?
Was this the thing, the dandy thing?
Yeah, a part of it, yeah. It's like Beau Brumwell.
Yeah, that guy. Yeah, I don't understand why. I don't know.
I think it's tailoring became more important than frilly showiness. It was like how like can you shape your body in like coarse lines were more visually appealing.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure.
Well cut, as in like they were wearing skinnier pants and like not everything was in the way and those kind of things, right? That's what well cut means.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that makes more sense. I think we've like just the same way we've answered that other question, kind of like the same idea. Like they became, it was like the new thing.
It was the new trend, and it says, oh no, my computer's gonna die. It says that tailoring became like a way to tell how well something was made versus like how many frills can you cover up your chest with or something. It was like a measure of quality.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like we kind of like covered it already in the last question, but it just shows that like they weren't so much as like working on like having a bunch of like cute little things on them, like rather than like looking clean cut and nice and what we would consider today more manly. So
I think the way that the jackets were also cut, they were like right above, I don't know. It's like they were much higher cut up, and I think it allowed for like it everything, I feel like everyone looks like they could jump on a horse at any moment. Like it was just more flexible and yeah, reasonable, like we talked about, but fitting so it didn't get in the way and catch on things when you're trying to like jump over buildings, or I don't know. It's not like they're doing parkour, but I'm just thinking of Les Mis right now in my mind. And like just they were much more physical, but also wanted to look professional. I don't know. We'll move on to the next question. Okay. How do these things relate to such issues as relationships between men and women, or the fact that the middle class as gaining, she worded that straight, more power in England? Okay, so let's focus on the first section of that question. How do these issues relate? How do these things relate to such issues as relationships between men and women? Fashion issues.
Yeah, I feel like it kind of separated men and women a little bit more. Like it kind of made men more manly and women more like feminine, just because before they kind of dressed very similar, and then now all of a sudden there's this huge change. Like women wouldn't wear like the things, you know, like they don't wear what each other would wear like in the slightest, like the tux type looking things or whatever you'd call it. Like women don't wear those, and so it kind of like made a huge division between the two genders.
So there was a reference in a reading, I don't know if it was one she posted, but it was like, it made it much more like you could define what women were in the genteel class, which meant like the women that were pale, like they wore the pale clothes, they had the nice dresses, but it definitely made it's funny because you would think throughout history like, oh, women have been gaining power, like we've been making there less of a division, but I didn't even realize that it was more of a division. Like so women became more soft versus like obnoxious and frilly. They became more soft and beautiful, like the vision of beauty in the Greek styles, but then men became more like powerful and strong and reasonable.
Yeah, same thing. Agree with you both. Like the division, especially they dress the same. Like everything from their hair even was like big and poofy and curly and powdered and whatever, and like super frilly. So I think that division, yeah, exactly caused that. Just women to be more feminine, men to be more manly, and just started like making a gap in fashion between the two. But I don't know how that
Yeah, and it's
their relationship, but
yeah, it's interesting that because they had all this Greek influence now, but that didn't really influence the men's fashion. Men's fashion just became more practical, but like art and beauty is more associated with women, and so they're the ones that took on the roles of that style coming back in. But men went in like a different direction because there was war, maybe.
I feel like, and I don't know if this is right, but I'm just kind of thinking as we go, is like before the men became more manly and stuff, like I feel like there was a lot of women leaders, and then during this time I feel like it almost switched to where all the leaders after this were mostly men, and so I don't know if that's when like roles came into play.
Yeah, it's tough to know that because right after this is the reign of Queen Victoria.
Right, so it's like obviously in some places it's still the same,
yeah.
like they're like their stuff, but it's like for a lot of things I feel like men became like, I don't know, I'm sure they already were, but I feel like it even more so went towards like men do this, this, and this, and women do this, this, and this, and they make everything pretty kind of thing. And I'm sure it was already like that to some extent, but I think that this dressing stuff, I think it might have enhanced it in some way.
Gender roles, so that is our answer. Just so that Sana can understand. How do these things relate between issues between men and women? So it separated the gender roles even further. Okay, so the last part is how do these changes, these issues, show that the middle class was gaining more power in England? That's how I'll word that. Yeah.
Good question. Yeah, I think we're like right at a half hour.
Okay.
Yeah,
So just answer this is the last thing.
We're at 04 and it's 34, so we're at 30.
Oh, cool. Things relate to issues that the fact that the middle class is gaining more power in England. Fashion was less extravagant and crazy, so more accessible on like a wider scale for everyone to have access to it.
Yeah, maybe there just like wasn't such a gap between like whereas before like you had to maybe be super wealthy in order to buy all the frilliness, and then like you could just easily tell somebody who was middle class because they didn't have that. But now, since like a lot of that's going away and it's becoming simpler, like maybe that, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think it goes again with like bringing different cultures kind of together and mixing all that kind of stuff in with it. Kind of just, I don't know.
Okay, define cultures. Like
not cultures.
conquest?
Sorry?
Conquest?
One more time.
From the conquest?
Yes. So like how different ideas and different things are coming together. I think that like kind of plays a part in, I don't know how to answer this question.
Okay, so the middle class is gaining power in England, maybe because they didn't have a king reigning. They had a regent reigning who wasn't like royalty, or he wasn't the king, it was Prince Regent. And they just had the revolution in France, and England kind of emulated France. So they were like, oh, well, we can, because didn't it fall apart during the Regency, and then that's why like Queen Victoria came into power? Something like that. So like maybe they were emulating, still copying a revolution. They were like, the middle class can have power too.
Yeah, I don't have any input. I wish I did. I don't understand exactly how, like, so the question is like, how does this fashion statement stuff make it so that the middle class has more power?
Say that again?
So like, let's see, wait. So all these things that we've been talking about, all the different fashion trends, they're
doing homework. Please
like, how are those making the middle class gain more power? Is that the question?
How does fashion show that there is a rise in the middle class? I'm just gonna go. She'd kind of squish two questions together, but the first part of the question doesn't make sense with the second question squished in. So, but if it's about Regency fashion, I'm just gonna assume like, how does fashion show that the middle class was gaining more power in England?
Oh, got you.
Is it just kind of like the middle class? I feel like because it's not so, their dressing isn't so dramatic, it's almost easy, like easier access to it because you don't have to, they maybe didn't have to be so rich to buy the things that like were normal to wear. So maybe it kind of started to blend a little bit more.
Yeah, and maybe there was more intermarrying between classes.
Mm. Yeah.
It wasn't that like all about the dowries and stuff in Jane Austen's novels. It's like, yeah, just marry a rich man. It doesn't matter. So it's like you have this mix of all these people just kind of. I mean,
Yeah, and when they're all dressed the same, like it's kind of hard to tell who's rich and who's not, and so then it kind of just mixes everything together. I don't know.
yeah, I mean, I guess we're not really sure what the last question is, so I think that's okay. We discussed for 30 minutes, so I think that in general, there was a move away from the ridiculous to the more practical, and that led to being able maybe to spend your money better too, because you weren't trying to do all these crazy things. And then there's a lot of copying France. The end. Anything else?
I think
Okay, just end it.
yeah, should we call it?
Yeah.
Okay, ending it now.